Hey, deserving listeners, sister wives, let's check it out.
Getting ready to circle up for our family prayer. And Garrison sees Isabel being 10, dancing around. That's kind of her thing. And it just triggered him. He just was like, can't we already have prayer? But unfortunately, instead of saying that, he lashed out and got angry.
Isabel, stop being stupid.
Garrison, you stop being stupid.
Really? I'm not being stupid.
Yes.
Okay, so there's been a lot of things happening, but for time's sake, I'll just highlight what's happening here. That they've been having a really good time together. The kids have been getting along, and they got together for prayer. And Isabel, who is one of Christine's younger kids, apparently was being a little squirmy in the circle, and then Garrison says, Isabel, stop being stupid. And Janelle, in the narrative later on, being interviewed, is saying, well, Garrison wanted to say, hey, let's all concentrate, but instead said this thing. So, yeah, I don't know what that says exactly. Yeah, I don't know how old Garrison is at this point. Let's see. I wrote down how old he was at the beginning, or did I? No, maybe not. So, I don't know. He looks like he's 12, 13. Yeah. Me and my siblings got along pretty well, but, there were times when you just got really annoyed with each other. You imagine they're stuck in the RV, and there might have been some build up to that, or maybe Garrison felt like he was being put down by someone else. There's always a background to this sort of thing. It's not like Garrison just went out of the blue, say something like that. Maybe Garrison was shamed earlier for not being calm or being too squirrely or something, and then you could see a situation like that. So let's see how the parents manage.
Rude everybody.
You made the first comment.
I went to stand up for
Let it go.
Let's call
Just
it.
walk away from it.
That's all I'm asking. Hunter, all it does is accelerate.
I'm done. Okay?
Thank you.
I've learned with my boys especially, they'll get to this point where they just can't back down. And I've had to learn over the years to kind of step in. It's a process. I have to really step in. I get right in their face. Garrison.
Yeah. I don't want to say that anyone's parenting is bad based on these tiny little clips. As a parenting expert myself, as someone that was hired to go into homes and help parents for many years I wasn't referred just to any family, families that had the most difficult or rebellious or problematic situations, then I would go into the house. And over time, you learn a thing or two, and you learn that all the little guides that you see, especially like the listicles, are oversimplified. And you also learn that there's a lot of ways to raise good kids, and you also learn that you're going to make mistakes as a parent, but that doesn't mean that your parenting is overall mistaken, So whenever we go into this kind of zone, I'm not super comfortable just making any kind of sweeping generalizations. Plus, from the outside, it always looks worse than it is, or it typically will, because you're not in the emotional mix. You don't have the history with each other. You don't know the rhythms of the family. It just never feels comfortable as an outsider, particularly if you've never been in that parenting role. It always just feels like parents are being too harsh. Sometimes they are, but even if they're not, or they're being a little too harsh, but then they pull back, so I just want to point that out. But Janelle has said this sort of thing before, or she hasn't said this in that extreme. I'm going to get in their face. That's not how I would describe it. I mean, she's describing what she's doing off camera. But what we've seen on camera is that she tends to sweep in and, ground, like that one, it was like a couple seasons ago when Garrison and Gabriel were in some kind of argument, and then she came in and took Garrison's computer away. And, I've already been over all that. I can't know if it's helping or not. Maybe it's the best thing to do. There's a lot of ways to raise happy kids. But I was saying that I would be more encouraged if she did what actually Cody did, which is a more slower paced exploration, one that believes in the kids a little bit more. Cody, and they're editing it severely, but Cody managed to come in and eventually get Garrison and Gabriel to apologize to each other and be smiling together. Anyway, so I'm not saying Janelle is a bad parent or Cody is a good parent, but we can use these examples, these heavily edited examples, as grist for the mill. But her saying that she gets, I can't imagine any parenting behavior or plan that is constructive being described as I get in their face. Now, maybe she's saying there are times when Garrison and Gabriel and maybe Hunter, but it seems mainly Garrison and Gabriel, that when they start to lock in on their conflict, I have to really kind of wedge myself in there, or else it'll just escalate because they won't listen to me. So I have to really intervene heavily. If that's what she's saying, okay, I wouldn't know necessarily if that's a good idea, but that would be more open to the possibility that it would be evaluated by me as something that would be constructive overall. But to word it like I have to get in their face, and then you think about what they're doing to each other, which is to get in each other's face, however that's interpreted, then you do what you see.
You can't ride in the RV. You do need to apologize.
Isabel was being her normal self. Everybody was fine. And nope, you snapped. You were being a little baby and you snapped.
Because we're always an hour late.
Yeah,
we're always an hour late.
2-3 hours late.
Heck, we're lucky if we are an hour late. Yeah. We're lucky at that.
And you were really rude. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah. Right here.
So Hunter is trying to help. I don't know if that was helpful, but he's trying to tell one of the younger boys, look, you were rude. The way Hunter comes across, it seems like it would be helpful, a role model. The kid that was receiving that seemed to be like, well, you didn't seem that bothered by it, so maybe it was helpful. I don't know.
The family, everyone's cramped in close quarters. I think it gets a little bit stressful. Some get mad. I don't know.
I love Isabel and all, but it was just that we were a couple hours late, and as we went on through the trip, I told Isabel that I was very sorry.
So we finally get on the road at noon.
Okay, so later on in an interview, I'm pretty sure that's Garrison, is because they're aging every season, and so they look a little. Plus, there's a number of them. Plus, I haven't been paying as much attention to the kids because I don't want to have a reaction video where I'm commenting on their personalities or something because they're kids, and I'm not a fan of even having the kids on the show. But if we're looking at the parents and their parenting, we just saw what Janelle was saying, and anyway, Garrison is saying that he felt bad, and it seemed like he was going to cry. I think because he felt bad. So he admits that he had he was in a bad mood. He's grumpy, and he said something grumpy, and he felt bad about it, and he apologized. Okay, that's good.
We got engaged, actually. And that's just before we got married.
Cody and I were introduced by his sister. She and I were friends, and she introduced me to him. I grew up in this culture. I had many moms.
I wasn't raised as a fundamentalist Mormon.
By the way, this chord progression is one that I landed on, and I thought I didn't think I had invented it, but when I first came across it as I was just playing around with chords, I fell in love with it, and I still love this chord progression. It's a magical chord progression. It was used in Lay Lady Lay by Bob Dylan, but when I came across it, I hadn't known those, and I wrote a song with this, but it just is so sad, but it's sad, but elevated sad. And it has chromatic elements to it that I always like, where there are notes in the progression where it just goes down a half step each time. So I've been hearing the sort of interstitial music, and usually it's just kind of nothing music, like some sort of blues riff. Somehow I'm impressed with whoever made the music choices here. And it also kind of is evocative of what they're doing here. They're watching these home movies of the past and reminiscing. And there is, it's a sad but happy, I don't know. Anyway.
The Mormon church, and they don't live polygamy, and just one thing led to another. So when I first met Mary, she was really shy. And the only way I knew she was digging on me was she was smiling at me all the time. So we started this friendship, and the real discovery was that she was a great listener. We just had this kind of romance kindle up, and then we just really hit it off. So we dated.
It's interesting. I'm glad we're getting this detail. So she was really quiet, and she was a great listener, and he's a great talker. He's more comfortable being the center of attention. Nothing wrong with that, but it can become a problem, right, if it's too rigid. Pros and cons. A lot of couples have that difference, and when it works well together, it works. Me and my wife have that. It's like that. And there are pros and cons to that. So, like, one of the cons is that when I want her to say something, it's harder to get her to do that. The con for her is when she wants me to shut up, it's harder for her to do that, So it's not, anyway. So he's saying that was their dynamic in the beginning. It's interesting. Yeah, it scans with the way things look today.
Dated for 2 months and got engaged, and then we got married 4 months later. We knew each other for 6 months when we got married. That was just after.
Yeah, I think I knew that. I think I knew that it was a pretty quick turnaround.
You know what? Cody was awesome. He was really sweet. He was happy. He was enjoying life. And I loved being with him.
Is that a comment on him today, that he is less happy today and less enjoying life today? I don't know. I mean, that's what she was saying.
I knew Cody and Mary before they married Janelle. As a girl in the church, when Cody and Mary got married, they became like the golden couple of the group for a while.
And I'm sure there were girls going, oh, I'd love to be in that family.
Yes, no. Yeah.
And the guys were like, how can I be like Cody? He's totally gonna.
Yeah, I heard from Christine Perrier, the former member in AUB, about this dynamic. Because it wasn't intuitive to me it would be this way, but when I heard it, I was like, oh yeah, I guess that is how it would play out. Because I was asking, well, how does the math work? Because if the ideal is to have 3 wives, and you have equal number of men and women, and same-sex relationships are not allowed, then how does that work? Because I had heard that in some fundamentalist groups that have polygamy, they will either have an unwritten rule or a written rule that they have to get rid of a lot of guys at some point, and they will do that by pushing them to the limit or scrutinizing them too much and then saying, oh, you broke a rule, and then they kick them out, that kind of stuff. And then that would also cull the herd so that the only men left are the most locked in on the fundamentalism. But to me, that was the only way the math would work. But then what the former member was saying was that, no, a lot of guys just never have a relationship. They never get married. They just stay single their entire life. And I can't remember how we got here, but then the former member told me that so if you've been around, I don't know if you heard that, but if you've been around the channel long enough, I think it was on the audio podcast, and I heard that sound, and I could not figure out what it was. But now I know what it is. It's my lightsaber that I made at Disneyland. And when the batteries are running low, it makes that sound. The problem is that it's unintuitive that that would be the sound. And I Googled it, and there's a lot of other people that talk about how they heard, because it's quick and it's such a weird sound. And it's kind of freaky, honestly. A lot of people went for a long time wondering where that sound was and what it was coming from, because it has like a ventriloquist kind of effect to it. So apparently my lightsaber needs batteries. Anyway, so that got me. Now I forgot what I was talking about. Who cares? Let's continue watching.
I have a lot of wives and single guys.
Oh, now I remember. So what the former member told me was that the hot guys, I think that's what she said, like the hot guys get all the wives, and the not hot guys don't get anybody. So they're kind of referring to that when Cody and Mary got married, then a lot of the other women were like, ooh, I want to be with that guy, you know? And you could see like a runaway effect where the more wives you have, the more attractive you seem. And you know what I mean?
Guys would hang around them because they were hoping that because of all the young girls that they were attracting, they would get some of the fall-offs.
When Cody and I first got married, I mean, we had already decided that we were going to live plural marriage. And so we would discuss different people. It's like, I wonder about.
Okay, this is interesting. You'd think you would have had this in the first season because it's pretty interesting to hear about the foundation. So we're getting more specific. We've heard, surface level stuff, but they're saying that in the beginning they both, from the very start, wanted to be in a polygamous marriage, and they both were looking at other possible candidates. So, because that's that question of just like, how much do these women want to do that? Because from the outside, it doesn't. From my cultural pocket, no one would want to do this unless you're polyamorous, but you wouldn't necessarily want it to be genderized like this. You know what I mean? But to hear at least some hint, and of course we know that. If you're raised in that environment, do you really know what the options are? Do you really have the agency to make that choice? But I don't know. We're hearing from her narrative that she wanted it from the beginning. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. So it's time for Halloween, trick-or-treating and candy and spooky movies. Maybe a time for us to reflect on our fears. And, Halloween is supposed to be fun, but when we think about our fears, we can be afraid of all sorts of things, right? Like Freddy Krueger and that monster in the closet. But in my world, I talk with clients about fears that are more down to earth, like being afraid of failure or social anxiety or being terrified of abandonment. Of course, therapy is a wonderful place to explore these sorts of fears. A therapist can help us to face them, identify them, help us to dismantle them, to recover from them, to help us live without the constant or occasional feelings of being under threat. Well, one place you can find a therapist is at BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's definitely worth giving a try. So overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
I remember meeting Cody for the first time. I'd gone to their house, and I remember Cody walking in the room, and it was like that. I honestly had that bolt of lightning, like I had forgotten something, and I remembered it.
Mary and Janelle and I would actually do things once in a while, just keeping a friendship going. We'd meet and have pizza. So Janelle and I had lunch together. And it was just an interesting experience. And I kind of looked at her and I said,
they didn't say this directly, but it almost sounded like Mary chose Janelle kind of before Cody did. Sounds like Mary was trying to bring her. I mean, they didn't say that directly, but it kind of sounded like that. And then it sounds like Janelle, in her narrative, she fell in love or had some sort of feeling with Cody, and then Cody. It's just interesting to hear, right? Because if you look at this, and of course this will happen, but the assumption, at least from my cultural pocket, is he's the one that's just like, okay, I want to marry you. And they're like, no, I don't want to be in a polygamous marriage or whatever. And he's like, you will, or whatever, you know what I mean? But it sounds more driven by the women, at least in terms of the steps taken. Because we heard that with Robin, that Mary also said, because according to the narrative, Cody was like, well, she's divorced. And Mary was like, that's okay. Don't worry about it, you know?
You know, you and I should consider, I was trying to be appropriate.
And I remember where we were because it shocked me, I think, because I remember. But I blew it off because honestly, there were a lot of guys that told me that.
Oh, really?
Yeah! I was already investigating the faith. The faith was attractive to me. I felt called to it. So I don't know, just jumped in. I'm like, okay, let's do it. And then it just was.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to look at my notes here. She's saying that a lot of husbands were offering her a spot. My dogs are barking. And I know at least one of them did not. So she grew up regular Mormon, not AUB Mormon. And she's saying that she was, playing around with the idea of joining the AUB. I wonder what that's about. I wonder why that would be.
It was like a natural progression. There was never a time when it was like, wouldn't even consider that we even had a courtship.
So Janelle was really pragmatic and down to earth. So we didn't really have a romantic relationship.
I feel like we almost kind of got married and didn't really know each other.
It was almost like we were following a hunch, so to speak.
Yeah, I definitely knew that I was supposed to marry Cody. I had prayed about it, and he would.
Okay, people have different marriages. It certainly doesn't sound very romantic. It's not the sort of thing that I would want to live my life by, right? Because on one hand, she's like, I feel like I'm supposed to marry him, like maybe a decree from God or some cosmic fate. But then they're also saying that, Cody's saying that Janelle was very pragmatic, which I think is alluding to how there wasn't a lot of, it didn't feel the same way as it did with Mary, where there was joy and love and attraction and compulsion to be together. With Janelle, it was more like it was more businessy or something. And, maybe they did learn to end up having a deep, deep connection and a lot of attraction. But it's just interesting to hear the beginning.
Was the guy that I was supposed to marry, and quite specifically that my children were supposed to be born to him. I can't imagine a better father or husband or anything than Cody.
Then this is how Christine came.
Okay, it's good to hear. We could wonder if there's more to the story, and I'm sure there is, but it's relieving to hear. And their occasional, they do say things like this. They know they're on camera, but I don't know, seems sincere. And because if it was otherwise, then you worry about the kids and
In the family.
Janelle and Cody and I were at this point where we were still trying to figure things out, still trying to agree on things. It was almost like it was one or the other. Cody was either taking Janelle's side or my side.
Okay, so this is an elaboration on what I think Mary had said a few seasons ago, that from the beginning, Mary and Janelle were not getting along. And I think what we're hearing is that they had a hard time agreeing on things, and then Cody would just have to, oblige one, he would have to make the decision as to who would win. And sometimes it would be Mary, sometimes it would be Janelle. So I wonder what that's about. I wonder, it just seems like that should be combed out before you even think about getting married, right? It seems like they don't really, to me, before you get married in a monogamous situation, you would spend ideally at least a couple years, if not longer, getting to know the person, getting to know the family, maybe moving in together and seeing how that works out before you take that leap. To marry two people, you would think you would need even more time, right? But the way that they do things is, there's courtship and there's agreement, and then boom, you're married. So it doesn't surprise me that there would be some incompatibilities or some conflict.
When Christine came into the family, it was like the odd one out had somebody now. It's like if Cody was out on a date or if it was, not my night with him, it was like I was completely alone. And when Christine came into the family, we had a lot of fun together on a night that Cody wasn't with me. We played a lot. We had fun together.
This is our wedding day.
Okay, that's interesting to think about, that dynamic. But also, I think what Mary is saying is that Christine and I had a good time together, but Janelle and I didn't. So that's interesting.
It's really white.
We're in white. We're holy. Before I ever met Cody, I was already in love with him. So my sister told me about you two, and I actually fell in love with the story. And then I met him, I'm like, well, dang, a face goes with it too. That's all good.
Every once in a while, Christine does that kind of affectation, and you just see the youthfulness of Christine. But anyway, that's so interesting. So she heard about Cody and Janelle and Mary and fell in love with him just on the description, having never seen him or met him. That's interesting, right? And it's just so fascinating that right next door to me as an American, there can be a family and individuals that are operating from that point, because it's not just, they're all following it's varied, each one of them, but it's all within that mindset, right? And it's so different than the way that me and my circle would ever approach any of this sort of thing, And there's different strokes for different folks, and it's kind of it's one thing to hear about arranged marriages, say in India or something. When I watch 90 Day Fiancé, sometimes there'll be something like that, and it's very, very different. That you would have two people that don't know each other, that two families get together and say, yeah, you're basically, two of you are getting married. Not every Indian family is like this, but, apparently some are. And I think, well, that's completely different. But, that's halfway across the world, right? But to think that, they don't live very close to me, but there are people like this, I imagine, nearby where I live. And you just think, wow, there's a lot of variety in life.
The problem with me having a crush on Mary and Cody was there had to be a second wife before I could marry into their family.
Oh, that's different. So she fell in love with Cody and Mary, and then because she wanted to be a third, she has to wait until there's a second wife.
I always really just wanted to be a third wife. I always did. I was raised in the culture. I just thought that it sounded the easiest. The first two would work out all the relationship issues, and then I would just go in and all the issues would already be worked out.
Yeah, that's what she said before, or things like that, she said. And the former member, Christine Perrier of AUB, told me that if you only have two wives, you only get into one level of heaven, but if you have three, then you get into a higher level, a better heaven.
So there'd be nothing else for you to work out. Never wanted to just be married to a guy by myself, because they're a lot of work. That's all it takes. No, I'm serious. So when I found out that Cody and Mary had married Janelle, I decided that I could like him again.
Mary, Janelle, and I were living in Wyoming, and every time we came to Utah, Christine was there.
It's
and
true.
She was a shameless flirt.
I was a shameless
She
flirt.
made it.
Yeah, so somehow that doesn't surprise me. Right. It's interesting to hear that the genesis of each of their relationships is so, it makes so much sense that with Mary and Cody, that they are this cute couple, and he's talkative and she's a good listener and she's smiling, and she doesn't impose a lot of her needs on anything. And then with Janelle, she's more pragmatic and not as present emotionally. And then Christine is out there and truthful and flirty and talkative and no filter. So it is now how it started.
So apparent to me that she was interested in me, she started applying pressure.
I was not the first to apply pressure. There was a mutual pressure going on. Don't even go there
I
with
never
me.
pressured you.
What? whatever. You have those goo-goo eyes. Girls, doesn't he have the eyes? When he looks at you with those eyes, you are the most important person in the world. You are loved far more than any woman in the world has ever been loved before.
It's sweet to hear. I mean, it's hard for me to endorse this lifestyle or this way, but if this is going to happen, then you like to hear it, that Christine says, I love, or the way his eyes look, he makes you feel very special. And if he is like that, then that would help in a polygamous marriage, because if you can't make someone feel special in the moment, then that would be hard to live with as if you're one of the sister wives.
And you turn those eyes on me. And all other guys didn't compare, and you were it.
So with research by John Gottman and colleagues here at the University of Washington in Seattle, my alma mater, those of you playing bingo, you can check that box. And one of the findings that they found is, because they would have couples come into the lab and they would observe them and do different things. Then they would track those couples over time. And one of the things that they found is that for the couples that lasted the longest and were the happiest together, when they looked back at the beginning, they found that the couples that can speak positively in a good way with good memories about why they fell in love, then that was a strong indicator that they were going to last into the future, which kind of makes sense, but it's science. It's a finding. And for us couple therapists, sometimes we'll test that out in the beginning of the assessment period of a couple. I'll ask if it makes sense to dedicate some time to the session, because sometimes they're in a crisis, we have to address that. But at some point, I might ask them both to tell me about how they fell in love with each other. It's also something you just ask an individual client too, if their marriage is of topic, And what you will hear from couples that are overall doing well and are likely to do well in the future, you will hear something like this, where the individual, one of them or both, will say, well, I fell in love with him because, even if they're fighting, right? They wouldn't be in couple therapy if they're not fighting about something, right? But through all of that, they can still identify and feel like, well, okay, she's really frustrating to me now, but yeah, I fell in love with her because she was warm and she walked in the room and she was just beautiful and she was smart, and, and we would just have so many laughs together, like whatever, that kind of stuff. Whereas if someone says something like, I don't really know why we fell in love. In fact, you could argue that Janelle and Cody have, because the idea is that you rewrite history. All the couples probably felt a lot of love in the beginning. That would be likely. But for the couples that have descended into resentment and pain and hurt and distance, even though the memories are in there somewhere, they can't access them, or they've rewritten them such that they don't, not only do they not remember, but they think we were never in love. Because how could I possibly, I must have been deluding myself. I was too young. I was pressured into it. Sometimes that happens, but more often than not, at least in the circles that I run, the kind of clients that I see, I would surmise, given the full story, that they were in love just like every other couple, but because of the problems, they've rewritten that history. So it's possible that for Janelle and Cody, they were at least more in love. Maybe it was a little cooler than the others, but there was love and affection and attraction. But when they think about the beginning, they both have a much more subdued narrative of, Cody's like, well, she was sort of pragmatic. And for Janelle, she's like, yeah, we barely knew each other. And, it could have been that way in that direction. But if that's the narrative, if that's the story of how you fell in love and got together, it doesn't have any of that oomph, of that energy, the way Christine is saying right now. Christine is really exhibiting that. It's just like, oh, I just, he was so good looking in his eyes, when he looks at you. That tells me that Christine and Cody are bonded, at least well enough. that it will be a good foundation going, because over the time, the marriage explicitly that is the most at risk is the two of them. But there are people who, another thing that John Gottman and colleagues found was that, and this was mind-blowing to me when I was in graduate school becoming a marriage therapist, was that they found, and I'm going to butcher this kind of because for time's sake, but essentially there are three different kind of couples. And one couple is the couple that therapists are the most likely to identify as healthy. And those couples are very compassionate and validating, and they listen to each other and they talk about their feelings. And that's one type of couple. And that type of couple can do well. There's another type of couple where they fight a lot and they look like they're not doing well. And even when you get them to agree to be nice to each other, they can make choices or they'll lose control and they will be hurtful to the other person, or they'll lose their temper, or they'll get grumpy, or they won't give the other person the benefit of the doubt, just that kind of stuff. And from the outside, it looks like, oh, they're doomed, or we got to change that. We got to make sure we get rid of all that negativity. Well, what they found was that these couples, now they might actually be going down the tubes, but you have to take the whole relationship into account and find out, not only are you seeing a lot of conflict, but there are some couples that actually last in the future where they had a lot of conflict, but they also had a lot of intimacy. And you need a 5-to-1 ratio is what they found. But in a nutshell, the couples that exhibit a lot of conflict, especially when they come into therapy, because that's when they start, to really like, I've been having this thing I want to talk with you about. But when they're home, if they're also intensely intimate and eye contact and loving, but then some of the time there's a lot of volatility, those couples seem to do well too. But to a therapist, it looks like a dysfunctional relationship, but it's just a different style, because you can think of it as they do a lot of stuff together and most of the time it's neutral or positive, but occasionally it is negative. But there's a lot of contact and there's a lot of spontaneity and there's a lot of fire. Again, not to say that these couples don't go down a bad path, but if you can keep up all the positivity in relation to the smaller amount of negativity, then those couples tend to do well. There's a third couple that is also, is intuitive to typical therapists that would be a problem, is that they tend to be subdued. And there's not a lot of love, there's no fighting, and they kind of live independent lives. And from the outside, if they come into therapy and there's a little bit of conflict, we will try, if we just are operating on our own intuition, we'll try to get them to be like type 1 client, where there's a lot of validation and there's a lot of listening and there's a lot of emotion and there's no conflict or minimal conflict. But that's a disservice to the type 3 couple, in that we just need to get them back to a place where they're still fairly independent, but there's a little bit more connection and the conflict is resolved enough. From the outside, it would look like they don't really communicate to each other and they let go of their conflicts too much. When they bother each other, they just say, I'll let it go. That's kind of their mode, right? And from a typical therapist, it's like, that's a problem. So all that is to say that we might see those different types with the same man in terms of how they come together, in that Christine and Cody, because Christine right now is exhibiting a lot of positivity and you can feel it coming from her, of that attraction and love and appreciation and, sort of that energy that, given the fact that we've seen them fighting a lot over the last number of seasons, that maybe they're that type 2, where they have a lot of interaction and a lot of contact. Some of it is negative and you notice it because, and they edit it into the show because that's the most salacious bits. And then the Janelle and Cody is the type 3. And then Mary and Cody are the type 1-ish, 1/3, maybe. And then the Robin Well, I guess hopefully it would be they just started out, so maybe they're more maybe they're optimal if they're the type 1, because they definitely, they don't fight a lot, right? Well, there's some rub there. Robin jabs at him sometimes, so maybe there is a bit anyway, you get my point. I think because I guess I'm pulling for them all, right? Particularly for the kids' sake. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.